Developing Our Math Minds is a series of conversations and resources about math that is intended to be a journey of growth for families over several weeks. Each week, Minds lead mathematician and product director Brandon Smith and content development manager Nina Wu will be talking about the adjustments families are making to learning at home and the opportunities this situation provides for changing our relationship with math.
Hey Nina, how's it going? It's been a couple weeks since we talked last.
Hey Brandon, it's not much to report back on. Everything's kind of the same.
Is today Saturday or Wednesday or like is it morning or is it night? Who knows? So I thought we could have a conversation on what we like to say at ST Math in Mind is informative feedback.
For sure. I think informative feedback is one of those elements of the learning process. It sounds like a fancy term, a very formal term, but I think when it comes down to it, we all actually know what it is. And we can talk about what it is and what it isn't, but to me, when I break down and try to explain to people what informative feedback is, it's basically all around us and how we live our lives and how we have built our understanding of the world. It's anytime you do an action, something happens and you internalize that something happening and you make a course of action based on something happening. So for example, like if you're walking down some steps and you skip a step, the informative feedback is you falling down, and when you get back up and take your steps again, you are more careful and make sure to not miss that step. It's basically you're getting feedback from the world around you, from your actions, and it's giving you information.
And it happens, like you're saying, that informative feedback, it makes it sound like any feedback with information counts. But what you're saying is this sort of almost like a cause and effect outcome, but it also is happening right there. Like if I'm driving a car
Instantaneous.
and I'm making the corner, I realize through my perceptions if I'm missing the center line or I'm going too far left or too far, and I can adjust the input right then and there. It's not 4 days later. It's not a day later. It's not overnight. But like in math, especially, we almost never get that kind of feedback. If we're filling out a worksheet, I submit it for a grade. I get it back a day or two later. I then have to go all the way back to that moment of learning for it to even be close to even being useful. It's weird to me that math education, a lot of education actually just hasn't really embraced this concept that is like so ubiquitous in life across the board.
Yeah, and I think, an important element of informative feedback is it should be immediate. Because, maybe getting feedback on your answer like 3 days later or even a day later, even 3 hours later sometimes, like it becomes irrelevant to you and you kind of have to work again to put yourself back in that headspace.
That obviously makes sense with like a worksheet, right? I do it, especially if it's homework. I do it by myself. I turn it in the next day. I'm not supposed to talk about it with my friends because that's, we call that cheating. But in like an ed tech world, we can give it to you instantaneously, but it's almost always like the red X followed by a paragraph, which to me doesn't count. What do you think on those?
I think, yes, it is feedback. Yes, it gives you information. And yes, it's immediate, but it's like, how useful is it to the student or the person receiving the feedback? And if it takes a lot of work to read through the feedback, then it's not useful. I mean, if you like to take in information that way, cool, then it is useful to you. But I think for a lot of young students, it's not. There's a gradation of like how useful the feedback is to you.
Yeah, and the simplicity plays a role. If you have to spend a lot of time digesting what the feedback was, you've lost the immediacy because it took time to do that. But you've also lost that like simple relevance. Like it needs to happen right there in the moment when the choice was made, good or bad, and it's simple to digest. And we say a lot, like when you're learning these kinds of things, you don't want that working memory to overload you. In other words, I'm having to read a paragraph. What did the paragraph say? You have language, you have all these things competing for attention. Your
Right.
working memory overloads, and then all of a sudden the feedback is like, oh, I don't know. And then what does the red X have to do with my choice? Like all wrong answers get the same red X.
Right. And back to the whole idea of like the gradation of right and wrong, like why were you wrong? How wrong are you? Like where in the process did you go wrong? Are you a lot off or are you just a little off? Was it a calculation error or was it a whole misconception? And on the other hand of that is also why you're right, getting informative feedback when you're right. Like getting a green check also kind of isn't enough. Like it could have been a fluke. Like why are you right also? Because sometimes there's multiple ways of getting right.
Yeah, it should lead to that, my ability to repeat whatever positive action I just took.
Yeah.
And so if I just get that green check and move on, it's like, I have
Yeah.
no idea what I just didn't. I mean, if I've already mastered it with fluency, then
Right.
yes, I understand that the green check means I have everything right. But in that process of learning, it's tricky. And it's why ST Math can be so great. I mean, it's built on this principle. As soon as you make a decision, the animation is informative feedback. It happens right in front of you. It animates out not just like what the right answer is, it animates out your choice.
Right.
In other words, Gigi has created this real world for your actions to completely model what happens. Like if we're driving a car or walking down the steps, which is really great. And you can kind of feel the difference. So let's say we're doing the red X paragraph, and I got it wrong. And you're like, all right, I don't want to do the paragraph. We don't like that. What a lot of people like to do are hints. Like especially if you got it wrong, it's like, well, I don't want to give you a whole paragraph, and then there's like a button or something. Would you like a hint?
Yeah.
I'm not a fan of those. What do you think?
Why aren't you a fan of those?
Well, first of all, a hint to me suggests that I'm supposed to be able to make the connection. So in other words, I almost have to be able to generate the informative feedback for myself. Instead of giving me informative feedback, you're replacing it with a hint. And then you're asking me to self-regulate that. And if I have some degree of mastery, I can do that self-regulation. But almost always informative feedback, especially early on, comes from outside. And a hint, it was given to me. It came from somebody else. But it's not a replacement for informative feedback. So it almost feels like this addicting sort of
Right.
contract where if I give you a hint, you're supposed to be right now. And so I become addicted to hints and afraid of failure.
Yeah, I also see, to add to that, I also think, it's not really based off of any of your actions that you're trying out.
Right, it's probably the same hint. If we're both
Right.
stuck in a different way, it's going to be the same hint, regardless of what we do. So it's not
Right.
specific enough, is what you're saying.
And I think,
it's a good
I think
point.
more than anything, like informative feedback itself is a hint. If I got something wrong and I see the outcome of my decision, it's a hint of like you're kind of in the wrong direction and your answer's too big or something.
But it's telling you why your choice
Exactly.
was off, not just this random pop-up of like, oh, here's something.
Totally.
It's very intentional,
Yeah.
which is cool, which
Yeah.
is really helpful. So we're covering now in these two conversations two big pieces. One largely was that productive struggle component. And now we're talking about informative feedback. And they're both really important. And informative feedback is crucial because it helps me take an intentional next step, not a random one, not a
Right.
misdirection, like this intentional iteration. So I'm not just continually guessing.
Yeah, and so I think, we've kind of defined what informative feedback is, kind of highlighted what it is, what it isn't, where it shows up, and I think it's inherently embedded in ST Math. But, we're not always doing ST Math. We're doing other activities assigned to us, most commonly worksheets. And there's
Or
nothing...
videos, yeah.
Or watching videos. And there's nothing wrong with a worksheet. I know that, we can't be doing ST Math all day long. It's nice to mix it up and diversify our activities. And yeah, I don't think worksheets are inherently bad, but what they're missing is informative feedback. And so, yeah, what ideas do we have to kind of add in informative feedback into something more conventional, like a worksheet?
Yeah, if we're saying informative feedback is so helpful, then we probably want those in those learning moments. Worksheets and videos typically don't give them to us. Especially if I'm doing a worksheet entirely on my own, I'm going to have to then self-generate all of my own informative feedback, and that's incredibly difficult to do.
Yeah.
So I think with a worksheet or a video, it's really, really important to have some help and some support. So there's times, for example, teachers try and do this with group work or one-on-one facilitation. But just because we're talking doesn't mean the feedback is going to be informative. And I think at least step one is you want to get as close to real time as you can.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that your student can only learn if you're hovering over their shoulder at every single moment. I mean, we have to work.
Right.
We have a lot of stuff going on right now. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying, stop working and just hover over your kids. But don't delay feedback when you don't have to. If you can interject in the next 15 minutes, that's going to be better than waiting, 15 hours to do it. So I think that's like step one to get more out of a worksheet is get as close as you can to offering real-time feedback.
Yeah. And I think maybe a way to do that is to maybe you can pull in your resources, call on, friends or neighbors, and like grade each other's work somehow. If you're not totally available at that sooner time, I'm sure you can bring in maybe try bringing other people, and that might be fun for the student maybe.
That's a good point. I mean, that's the beauty of the concept of conversation and collaboration is we should be able through the course of coming at it with different strategies, different views, offer one another that informative feedback. But just because the kids are talking isn't necessarily mean that it's going to be productive. And it's not going to be the informative feedback in that way that amplifies learning. I think it's important that you're trying to be as specific as you can. So what worked, why, what didn't, and why. So you want to offer an action to do that gives you the same outcome next time, or can change it. So I like to do a really simple example. If you take young kids and you hold up your fingers and you ask them how many is this? They like to say 5. If they're old enough, 4 or 5-year-olds typically get it. But as soon as you go like this,
right,
the world gets crazy. And kids start to get funny, and maybe they say 32, 23, and they start guessing, right? 17, 20 million. It's not useful for me to nope, that's wrong, it's 5. All right, let's try it again.
Right.
Yeah, I said that was the red X problem. I think it's a lot better to say, all right, well, this is 5. Let's count them out together.
Yeah.
1, 2, 3. And what you do in that moment is I'm giving you steps towards the direction so that in the future you can transfer that, and I should be able to now ask you, how many is this? And hopefully you begin to build that strategy of counting to answer how many. So you're giving that specific action that either keeps the right outcome happening in the future or can change the outcome in that transferable way.
Yeah, I also think another strategy is whether they're right or wrong is always asking, why do you think that? And that was something I picked up on and practiced when I was in the classroom. I would always ask students, why do you think that? So, why do you think it's 32?
And don't just do it when they're wrong.
Exactly.
All the
and
time.
I would always ask students when they were also right, and it made them second guess. They're well, isn't it right? And I'm yeah, but just why? Just explain your thinking. In that way, you're not getting in that culture of punishing mistakes and coding behavior. I only ask you why you thought something when you got it wrong, but also when you're right. And so we celebrate mistakes and correct answers all the same because they're all equal learning moments.
Yeah, that's a good point. If we don't have a culture that values or celebrates failure, we're going to struggle to get the level of learning we want because learning requires that. That was the whole point of productive struggle is you're going to mess up. And so when you give that feedback, whether it's right or wrong, setting that stage for a positive response, I think matters a lot. And we do have to remember that anxiety and that emotion and that self-identity begins to play a role. If I then shy away, that could be a good sign that in that moment, I wasn't really set up for the feedback that I was going to receive. All right, so we want to be as close to real time as we can. We want to be specific.
Yes.
The perceptions and the actions that gave me the outcome. So, and what I can specifically do to keep that happening or to change it. And then creating this culture where failure is okay.
Yep.
And kindness, I think, is going to be a huge piece. But also the social component. Like, I might be saying I'm kind, but my facial expressions.
Right.
That social component, the entire thing has to happen. But what do we do like in ST Math? ST Math is already built on this concept of informative feedback. And we don't advocate that we just put kids on it forever with no facilitation or support all the time. And the role of an adult facilitator, of the parent, is really crucial. What can we do in something that already provides informative feedback to make sure we amplify those moments?
Yeah, I think there are ways to extend learning with what we have. We can extend learning in our worksheets by embedding informative feedback into them. And then, we can extend the learning from ST Math. So I know ST Math is producing some resource packets, a version for teachers and educators and another version for families at home. And they have a lot of great how-tos and just startup guides for ST Math, but also how to best use ST Math so you can get the most out of it. And then also a lot of extension activities and how to bring it out of the computer and screen into, your daily activities and conversations, and lots of fun games and manipulatives and experiential moments from ST Math. So that's one thing, and that's one resource that's available. But also, I think, there's lots of other ideas we can be creative about. Like, for example, I think it'd be really fun if families acted out some of these ST Math puzzles. I think the act of creating your own puzzle, even on paper, if a student were to draw out and design their own puzzles, they can be an ST Math game designer, and give it to their parent or an older sibling or something, or younger sibling, to try to figure out, and then the student themselves would have to explain or draw out or act out the informative feedback. And that's really deep learning. More fun would be to act it out.
And waddle like a penguin.
Yeah, you could act like a penguin. You can create more characters in the GG universe. You could videotape it and make a little series.
That highlights, we had talked about before, that concept of think before you click, where you're trying to make your thinking overt so that as the GG's real world acts itself out, you're even more primed to make sure that becomes that much more informative. And really any activity that can have you think about or to focus on the informative feedback. Like you're saying, where you act it out. It'd be really cool to see acted out in a couple of different ways. Like, how do you act it out if someone answers it wrong?
Yeah.
How do you act it out if someone answers it right? But you have to think through, how does this scenario actually work? That also helps you build a mental representation of your mind in your mind, so that when you later go back to it and you're struggling, that representation is going to come up, and the feedback will be even more useful.
Sure.
Which I think is cool.
And I think...
Do you think we could...
not even just how you're wrong, but there are so many ways you could be wrong. And so doing...
Oh, how wrong you
and
are.
I think you could...
almost got it.
And I think you could act that out many ways. So that activity has a lot of life to it.
And it would be very social. It would be a lot of fun that way.
Sure.
Do you think we could apply these to the worksheets? Because if ST Math already has informative feedback, we have models in place. We're acting out those models. On a worksheet, we typically don't. We just have the questions.
Yeah, and I think to build that out, I think, worksheets, as, conventionally boring as they can be, they're a really great tool, a core element to build from. You could turn your worksheet into a game show, a quiz show with, I don't know, fun consequences for your different family members if they get it right or wrong. You could I don't know. I always think it's a great activity for students to make worksheets for their parents or older siblings.
Have like them be the boss and make it for their parents.
Yeah.
But they have to be the ones to give the feedback.
Exactly. And I think there's really deep learning in that. Again, I think you could like impose a story into a worksheet type problem, thinking about the different contexts in which 5 times 3 could happen.
Like making up your own,
yeah,
whether it's a story or your own model.
Yeah.
Like draw a picture
Draw a picture, act it out, take a video of it. That was one of my favorite things to do because then students were really like living and experiencing the math and feeling it, like the magnitude of like 50 times 3 versus 5 times 3, Yeah,
because if you can create a model,
right.
What's awesome there, if I have that mental model in my head, I actually can start moving towards self-regulating informative feedback because I can see it.
Right.
Which is cool, and a worksheet doesn't typically give it. So rather than just giving a worksheet question with a model, have them come up with a model and see if they can interpret questions that aren't like the 5 times 3. Can they then interpret 15 times 3 or 50 times 3? And you could come up with some of those questions on the fly. And if you see that they're getting to the point that they can interpret these new questions, then they're starting to inch their way towards self-regulating some of that feedback, which is so hard when you're a novice at anything to be able to do. But the informative feedback doesn't just have to be like these stoic, rigid moments. You can generate informative feedback and have a lot of fun at it, which I think is really important.
Maybe we can like sum up our conclusions or takeaways about informative feedback.
Yeah, you want to be as real-time as you can, and you want to be specific. So you want to be simple. You want to be related to what the student's actions were, like what perceptions or actions should they be repeating, or what can they change so that the outcome will adjust. And in all of that, we have to realize that we can all interpret feedback, especially from somebody else, negatively. So set an environment, your tone, your facial expressions, how you say it, to create a positive environment, to celebrate failure, not to say, oh, you did it wrong, but to be like, yes, we're getting somewhere. This is awesome.
Yeah. Because it's this, it's this feedback that's really shaping our understanding of the world and how we approach everything in our lives. And it really does shape learning and how we learn.
Along with it is keeping in mind this message the whole time of it would be crazy for us to say informative feedback and not be afraid of failure if then it comes across and parents feel like they have to do all of these things right.
That's true.
And I think there's a powerful message, and it's a hopeful one, which is these are tools in your toolkit that you can begin to use and to leverage to amplify the learning that's happening. So if you are giving feedback and it doesn't quite feel as informative now as you would like, that's okay.
Yeah.
Just find ways to make some adjustments and see where the good decisions and the mistakes take you, because we're all going to make them.
Totally.
That's how learning is going to happen. So I think it's important that we always take away this message of hope that we're all in this together. We're all learning. Kids don't need us to be perfect, but they will see our progress.
Yeah, I love what you just said. And I think that's such an important thing to remember is like, these are just helpful hints and resources. And if you take away just one thing from it and are able to implement one thing, like what a great, shift and experiment. And maybe it doesn't work for you. And then you try something else. But they're all just offerings to help make the best of this time. And I know at Mind, we believe in lifelong learning and continuous improvement. And I think, we're never done learning. And so the lesson of learning how to be an educator in your student's life in any capacity, I'm still learning. And I learn a lot from you. I learn a lot from these conversations. I learn a lot from the people around me and seeing people do their thing. And I pick what works for me, what doesn't. And I'm really grateful for the practice.
Nice.
Yeah.
Now, if you are a parent or an educator working from, all parents are educators, especially now. It is important, though, to try and get some of that informative feedback and get some of that support, because otherwise it feels like you're left hanging. So I think it would be, as we finish the video, like a great question, kind of a question of the week, if you will. And we can do this through our Facebook community. So they can ask it and we will respond, and we will be as specific and as helpful as we can. Is what are you struggling with in terms of helping your kids on schoolwork? And it doesn't have to be just ST math. So for example, if you're struggling with 9th or 10th grade math somehow, we are a math organization, and we can help answer some of those questions as a way, as being a collaborative team, and providing some of that informative feedback.
Yeah, I would love to hear from the community.
So if you do have any questions, please ask, reach out. We're here to help. We're all in it together. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks. Bye.
See ya. Bye.